Welcome to Labour Lives. This is a podcast for Labour Lives and I'm Steve Gove Humphreys, and the interview you're going to be listening to is with Councillor John Clancy. On Wednesday 7th October this year, it was a wet and a windy October day, and I made my way to Councillor John Clancy's home in Quinton for a Labour Lives interview. This was the morning after Councillor James Mackay had decided to resign from the Birmingham City Council Labour Cabinet and start what turned out to be the demise of Sir Albert Bohr as leader of the Labour group within Birmingham City Council. The ship of state was in choppy waters. Soon it will be poled below the waterline. So Councillor Mackay played the role of the late Geoffrey Howe in relation to Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, with words about Sir Albert Bohr shutting himself away and lacking political vision. Couple this with the resignation of the Labour Secretary, Councillor Valerie Seabright, and Sir Albert Bohr being away in Europe on business, and within 7 days of this interview with John Clancy, Sir Albert Bohr had resigned, and Birmingham political junkies were thrown into a paroxysm of glee. The king is dead. Who will be the next king or queen? You might imagine that Councillor Clancy would have cancelled this interview, but no, he agreed he should continue and was open to answering questions about his personal life and ambitions. He relished the opportunity to tell Labour Lives his story. So who is John Michael Clancy? Well, he's the councillor in Quinton Ward in the Edgbaston parliamentary constituency and has been since 2011. Councillor Clancy is the perennial challenger to Albert Bohr in recent years. In fact, he's been the only challenger to Sir Albert's leadership of the Birmingham City Council. John Clancy was first elected to the council in 2002 and served as a councillor in Hodge Hill between 2002 and 2006. He then stood down and eventually decided to re-enter politics in 2011. He makes no bones that he's an ambitious man and he seeks the leadership of the Labour group. This de facto means he will become the leader of the Birmingham City Council, the biggest council within Europe. But in this early autumn morning he didn't seem to be too worried about the future. He was relaxed and open to answer questions. He made it clear that he was willing to stand if an election was forthcoming. With his BlackBerry and his iPad buzzing away and the doorbell ringing on one occasion, he kept on telling Labour Lives about how he saw Birmingham and what he wanted to do for this city. He was calm and confident. John Clancy is an English teacher by training, and probably uniquely on Birmingham City Council, he's also a qualified solicitor. He worked in financial services. He likes the detail and spoke almost lovingly about the arcane subject of retention of title and land law, getting to grips with commercial law issues, all subjects that most Labour politicians find not only hard but supremely unsexy. He's written 2 books and is interested in business and the minutiae of pension funds. Certainly not the sexiest of subjects, but one that he has seemingly a command of, and one that the Chancellor, George Osborne, has stolen from him. Watch this space to see how it all pans out. With Professor David Bailey of Birmingham University, he's written 2 books essentially promoting his economic theory and latterly his views on how pension funds could be made to be used as a driver of the local economy in the West Midlands. So here is an edited version of this long interview with John Clancy, a man of faith, an intellectual, but also somebody with an artistic hinterland, a man who likes to talk about numbers, a man who wants to be the leader of the Labour group and the next leader of Birmingham City Council, and a man who describes himself as a lefty, and he sees positives about Jeremy Corbyn, a man with a sense of humour who wants to get everyone to love his take on economics and what he calls Clancynomics. Well, does he have the votes amongst those 78 Labour voting members? Well, we will see. But it won't be because he isn't passionate about the job and what he thinks he can do. We live in interesting times. So, here is the interview with John Clancy. I hope you enjoy it.
Well, I'm originally from Stockport, up north, and that's where I was brought up. I was born in a hospital in Manchester, but I was essentially a Stockport lad. There's often a big difference between being brought up in Stockport and being part of Manchester, we were always Cheshire as a postal address when I was a kid. Greater Manchester never really took on as a postal address. People still put Cheshire if you live in Stockport. So I lived up there for the first 23, 24 years. I went to St Bede's Roman Catholic College, a grammar school in Manchester, Alexandra Park, Manchester. And I went to a primary school in Reddish, in Stockport. And I first left home when I went to university at Keele. And I was at Keele during the early 80s. So that sort of started to draw me down towards the Midlands, that sort of first day. And I suppose there are aspects to my background. I'm a Roman Catholic. I'm a practising Roman Catholic, but I'm probably speaking of a Brummie, more of the David Lodge Catholic agnostic sort of branch. But it's still very, very important to me, my faith. But that's obviously a deep part of my background and my schooling, of course, as well, all the way through. I went to university at Keele. I studied law and English, but also, most importantly, you were able to study for a teaching qualification during the 4 years. And it's one of the reasons I did the 4 years, because you'd have had to have done a teaching qualification for a further year in a BA. You'd have to do 4 years. In this case, you could do a foundation year plus a Cert Ed, plus do a 3-year degree. And Keele changed me fundamentally as an education. It made me much more. Even though I was studying law, even though I was studying English, I think it gave me a really broad education that makes me interested in a whole range of things, and also confident, I think, to be honest, in straying into areas that perhaps only people who really studied that area really ought to be looking at. I think that's affected me since, especially in areas like finance and so on. Thoroughly enjoyed my time there, and having done teaching practice, I almost did the Cert Ed as a sort of, well, if you've got to study something and it's a backup qualification, you might as well use your time and do that. So I did it. But I did obviously teaching practice at the beginning of each academic year, and having set out to become a solicitor, and fully intending that to happen, I ended up being a teacher, and I wanted to go into that full time. So my first job was as a secondary school teacher in comprehensive school. I was, for various reasons, my first job I took in Taunton in Somerset, in a comprehensive school in Taunton in Somerset. It was a joint Roman Catholic Church of England school, very rare, there were only 2 in the country at the time. There was probably some sort of sense of mission to sort of get involved in that kind of new thing. And probably, I think at the time I followed my girlfriend who was who lived in that area, which is probably a more important driver of which later. But so I went to Taunton. I taught for 4 years there, and I was enjoyed it. And ironically enough, I met my wife there, who was also a teacher. So the girlfriend went, and obviously the big thing was that's where I met my wife. So my wife came from Birmingham. After 4 years of teaching, perhaps it's this sort of Keele thing at the back that makes me sort of not necessarily settle on one thing, I don't know. I had a law degree, and I started to look at the future, and I decided I wanted to do Law Society finals, and then I practiced law for a few years in the early 90s. For various reasons, I decided, to be brutally honest, I missed teaching, and I went back to teach in comprehensive schools then for much of the next 20 years. So that's how I came to Birmingham. I had joined the Labour Party in Stockport, so that was in about 89. I think probably if I look back, I think the thing that prompted me to join it was actually the birth of my daughter. I think there was just something that came that I'd always been very, very interested in politics, but there was just something I think about looking to the future and looking to, you know, what the world should be like and is like, that prompted me to join the local Labour Party in Heaton Mersey branch in Stockport. So my first, I didn't get active in Stockport at all, other than delivering leaflets and going to branch meetings. But I certainly didn't get involved. The bug sort of didn't sort of bite strongly in Stockport, but it did when I came to Quinton. I joined the local Quinton branch Labour Party in about 1990, 90, perhaps 91, 92, certainly early 90s. And as these things happened, fairly soon I became secretary of the branch, as is always the way. I think I was secretary of the branch for a long time after that. In fact, I think there's only been about 4 branch secretaries in the last sort of 25 years. So that's how I got involved around here. And the thing was, I came to a situation in Quinton. This is what drew me in, I suppose, was the excitement of the politics here. You might have thought Quinton wouldn't be a very exciting place. You know, everything seemed to be going on in the centre of the city or in the east of the city, and big politics was happening there. And Quinton, perhaps these days, like you know, certain parts of St Coldfield, was simply used to having a Tory MP to represent the burghers of Quinton and 3 Tory councillors, and that had always been the case. Pretty much in modern democracy, the Quinton has been represented by was at that point represented by Tories forever, basically. So in the mid-90s, I suppose initially it was just a case of getting involved in the mechanics of the party then, and I found that interesting. I found the just running a branch, calling branch meetings. I found that quite interesting. I'd been an area secretary of the National Union of Teachers in Taunton, and I'd done quite a lot of organising inside the union when I was a young teacher as well. So I'd had a bit of experience of all that sort of thing. But what really started to get going was when we realised that there was real change in the air, and it came with the election, or the by-election in Quinton for Richard Bashford, the Red Rev, as he was called in those days. And so, as it happens, we'd already selected John Chapman at the time when the local MP died and a by-election was ready. We chose to have a fresh candidate for the purposes of the by-election, and John Chapman, who I'd already been appointed his agent, ready to go for the next election. So I'd obviously got heavily involved in that. But then we had the big by-election, and we won it, and obviously it was an historic event both for the constituency, but certainly for the branch, to finally have the hand on some kind of power, you know, inside the party. So that was a big thing that invigorated the branch, and I think we had the by-election in February, and then we had another election coming up in May. So we went straight into another one, and I was agent for John Chapman for that election, and we won that too. So we suddenly moved from political impotence to a situation where we had 2 out of the 3 councillors. And then, of course, our attention, because it was 95, 96, our attention then turned to the 97 general election, the parliamentary election. It was in 95, 96, I then became chair of the Edgbaston's constituency Labour Party. So that was quite a big thing as well for me personally. I thought that was the height of all heights. I was chair of a constituency Labour Party. It was great, and we then had to turn our attention to the big election coming up at the end of the major years, and we'd already sensed the mood in the air.
Clancy goes on to describe being the agent for Kath Hartley. He then goes into the history of how Gisela Stuart became the parliamentary candidate for Edgbaston, a formerly safe Tory seat.
We had a vote. We voted for Gisela, and there was no shenanigans, and Gisela was the candidate. So then we had this election to come. Organisation was phenomenal. Obviously, I got involved. I became chair of the campaigns committee of the constituency, and Bill Smith O'Gorman became the agent. We probably I would say that we ran probably one of the best organised parliamentary election campaigns that there's ever been inside the party. I would venture to suggest it was a phenomenal thing. I mean, hundreds upon hundreds of people, possibly thousands, got involved in it. We didn't know where it was going to end up. It was a phenomenally good campaign, and it just enthused and excited everyone. And it was the case that it didn't matter which wing of the party you were on. I mean, broadly speaking, I would probably put myself on the left, but there were obviously lots of people in the CLP who were on the right, but we all just got on with it, and it became the politics of organisation rather than the politics of ideas that took over the party for the next two years. And obviously, I learned a lot about that, and I was very, very proud of what I did. I chaired the campaigns committee. I was the parliamentary organiser for Quinton itself. And 1997, we had the famous victory, which seemed to define the night. And that, I mean, whenever I used to go anywhere in the country inside the Labour Party after that, if you said you came from Birmingham Edgbaston, they just knew. And they just knew that you were famous. You were actually famous going around the country if you had anything to do with Birmingham Edgbaston. So that was my early experience of the party. I think I got a taste of it very much then. I was working very, very hard as a head of department in a comprehensive school in Warsaw, where I was for 14 years, Frankie Harrison School in Warsaw on the Leamore estate, an area of extreme poverty. I have always chosen to work in even in Taunton, the place I was teaching in was a tough gig around there. I've always chosen to teach in areas of deprivation. That's my kind of teaching. I'm just not interested in grammar schools and the like. You know, what I want to go where I make a difference, and that's always been there. And I think, I suppose, you know, if I was to drop dead tomorrow, I would probably look back and say that my teaching career is the thing that has had more impact than my political career on the world. The literally, you know, thousands of kids that have been through my hands, and I think I've not taught full time as a teacher for a couple of years. I still do the occasional thing. My wife's a teacher as well, and I've occasionally done some supply to help her out at her school over the recent years. Education is very. I see education as very, very important. I've fallen out very badly with my own party over its education policy for most of the last 20 years.
We then had a ranging discussion over his views about the Blair government and their thoughts on education. It has to be said he was very unimpressed, and especially with Ofsted. He describes going through some 13 Ofsteds, his school never failing, but clearly the stress on the teachers considerable. He was working with children who lived in very dire circumstances and obviously felt passionate about their well-being. He had issues with David Blunkett, the Secretary of State for Education, and he then goes on to talk about Estelle Morris.
The person, to be brutally honest, I was most disappointed with Estelle Morris, because she was a teacher. She had a background in teaching. I saw her as someone who was practical, and I just wonder whether at the end of the day, one of the reasons she left and stepped down and said, "I'm not." If you recall, it was a big thing actually when Estelle became, you know, in terms of politics in Birmingham, when Estelle became, you know, a Secretary of State. We've not had that many, you know, out of Birmingham. And within a couple of years, she stepped down and said, I don't think I'm up to the job, and this, that and the other. But I just wonder whether, actually, she knew, deep down, that she was doing things that possibly, weren't right. And I don't think they were. Anyway, so there you go. There's a background for my politics as well.
So in terms of the crude way that people ask these questions, perhaps, do you see yourself on any particular wing of the party? And I say this because the limited reading that I've done on you demonstrates one thing. It demonstrates that you're interested in the difficult subjects that the party and politicians don't face up to. For instance, you talk about industry, you talk about work and work paying and the dignity of work. That could, if you just wrote those words down, be seen to be placing you.
Could be Liz Kendall, couldn't it?
It could be placing you on a particular wing.
Yeah.
But it strikes me, in what you've just said, that is so crude as to be a caricature.
Absolutely right. I think that. I think you're right. A lot of people have always placed me very much on the right of the party. I think because probably I'm associated with Gisela, or was in the early days, and associated with a constituency party, which is regarded as being, because Gisela's there, as being a very right wing sort of thing. No one, even Gisela herself, would accept that she's pretty much on the right wing of the party, as far right as you can probably get. Actually, if you want to use that kind of terminology, I accept. So
you're a believer in the concept, if I can interrupt you, in the idea that the Labour Party is this broad church.
It is. And I do believe in that, yes.
I mean, presumably in the same way that you made the allusion to your faith, and David Lodge and his writings on the subject.
I think that's the Catholic Church is a very interesting analogy. Absolutely right. I have this very odd. I don't know if it's of any interest to you or anyone else actually, but I have this very odd spiritual background in the sense that I have a very close association with North Wales. My mum and dad got a house there. I spent a lot of time there in a place called Nevin on the Llyn Peninsula. It's just north of Pwllheli. Very, very close. I go there a lot. It's my place. When I need to get out of stress or whatever, I just get in the car and I go there. And sometimes by myself at the cottage there, or my mum and dad are often there. Now, the only reason I say that is that even though I was brought up in Stockport, my mum and dad were both teachers. My dad eventually became a lecturer in electrical engineering at Stockport College, further education. A big passionate believer in further education, by the way, and it's been a disaster again what's happened in further education. And I do see a future in Birmingham, and anything that I get involved in about trying to resurrect further education as a concept. But my mum was a head teacher of a nursery school. Very proud of her. She got the MBE in the early days of when teachers and so on didn't get honours and so on. So she went to the palace and got an MBE. She was in the forefront in the 1970s and 80s of the concept of early education. She had the select committee actually come and visit her school. The education select committee, early years, came and visited her school because it was regarded as being an absolutely crucial part of, to be brutally honest, as tough an area of Stockport as you can get. Bridlington Rise is where it was, and she was making a difference. I saw this. I saw her make a difference as my mother. She was very, very powerful, energetic educator. I'm very, very proud of her. We both had long holidays in the summer, and we literally decamped in Nevin for 5 weeks sometimes, at least 4 weeks. So we were on the beach like non-stop for over a month. The whole family, an extended family, all that sort of thing. And the only reason I mention this is that every year there was a beach mission, an evangelical Scripture Union's the organisation, very evangelical, pretty sort of, you might call it right-wing Christian mission, that used to take the kids off the parents' hands for almost the entire day. We'd be in there at 10 o'clock in the morning. There'd be Bible study and passwords, it used to be called. The afternoon we'd play games. There'd be a service in the afternoon. The evening would be. I did this from about the age of 6 to 18 every single year. and it balanced my Catholicism. I had this evangelical, emotional, Bible-based, you must accept Jesus into your heart or else you're not okay. And it sort of balanced it. And this is the point, I think I've got a broad church Christianity at the base of this. And perhaps in saying what you're saying, perhaps it goes back to this whole Keel thing. I want to I want to go anywhere. I have no boundaries in terms of where I want to go. So coming back to the party, I think I was changed through law, the practice of law, in that I felt that the party can be far too ideological and not practical. Now, I know that sounds odd, bearing in mind what I said about Estelle Morris. She famously, that socialism is what Labour governments do, or it's whatever. If it works, I think was Estelle Morris's phrase that she used about education, and that's something that if it works, then it's socialism or whatever it was at the time. But when I went when I did law at university, being a bit of a lefty, and I would say that I've always been a lefty. As such, I wouldn't. People used to associate me with Blair again because of the at that time, because I was pushing for a fairly right-wing Blairite candidate, if you like, in my area. And but because I had interested in business, that was the other thing that started to make people think I was right-wing. But in fact, it's quite the opposite. When I went to university, as a lefty lawyer, I studied welfare law. I did all those kind of things, industrial law, actually, as it happens, because those are the sort of things you did. And I remember a lecturer, I can't remember his name, was from Toxteth, actually, as it happens, and he taught me, torts, and he did do a bit of welfare law with me as well. I did my final year dissertation on law centres and their role, or the lack of it. And interestingly enough, the theme of this dissertation was how law centres play out the tensions in law as to what law is and how useful it can be in society. And the fundamental sort of line was, actually, it's the lawyers and what they believe in the law centres and what they believe law is that determines how that law centre works. And actually what happens more often than not is that if law centres became casework centres, they closed down more often than not because the casework was just so massive, it took over. But when lawyers set up law centres which were closed door and went out to the community to involve themselves as lawyers in the community, they had more impact and more success than we're a free bunch of lawyers in this office in the middle of town. And that was what I worked on. It's another angle of ideological lawyers, practical lawyers. But this guy told me, this lecturer, he says, if you want to be a lefty lawyer, forget all this welfare stuff. You do equity and trust, you make sure you do land laws, you make sure you do all of the capitalist law. You go and you understand capitalism more than the capitalists, and that's how you become a lefty lawyer. And that stuck with me, and it was in a way too late towards the end, because I was doing all these lefty subjects. But that really struck me. And I think that that's been what's at the heart of what I've done since. I think that the left fails when it fails to understand capitalism. It defines it, it might take a Marxist analysis of it, but in fact, unless it understands its actual workings, it will never be able to change it. And one of the problems of people on the left, and the left of our party, is, and I think there's been a change, and if you even look at what Corbyn was doing this summer, he was trying to be quite practical when it comes to things like investment banks and small and medium-sized businesses, which is
some of the stuff that you've been talking about, I'm championing it, I might say.
I have to say, I think that's right, and championing it on the left. And I think it's come from that. And when I started to look at what I can offer, my view was, when I became a lawyer, it's interesting, isn't it? They've said all this thing about education, and you know, when I think about it, actually, the legal side of things may have had more of an impact in some ways. When I was a lawyer, we acted for. I was a commercial lawyer. You know, just the way I moved around Lee Crowder while I was there, I ended up there, and So I started to sort of, you know, do the basic stuff of commercial contracts, and I started to develop a bit of an expertise on retention of title.
In the early 1990s, John Clancy was involved with Lee Crowther and became also involved with the 3I Group and saw investment at the real sharp end. He went on to set out his view about what Labour should do when it came to investment in private industries.
Long-term, patient investment in small and medium-sized businesses struck me as being what we have to do in the Labour movement, never mind anything else. Understanding the financial instruments, understanding how you engage. 3I used to take shares in the business. They used to change the memorandum and articles of association in detail. They could put directors in whenever they wanted to. They were hands-off employed, but if they needed to be hands-on because things were going wrong, they would be in there. They'd sack the directors. There were ways that they did things in order to ensure that their investment, from their point of view, their investment was protected, but also, on the other side of the coin, that this business that could have gone bust in the normal free market sort of situation actually survived in order to protect the investment. So it just started my brain really going on what the party should be doing. And this is where I came up with this concept of venture socialism. And that is that what we need are the 3I model needs to be used. The real problem with 3I was then, in the 2000s, it just started getting involved in global capital. And they just left the city. Interestingly enough, their investments, I don't know whether they sold them on, I suspect not, are still in there. They're still, you know, the seeds that they actually planted are still growing in businesses across the world. It was the whole West Midlands, by the way. That's another angle. But they knew what was going on more than anyone else. And this is where the concept of a regional bank, and if you've got a regional bank, well, what are the things that go with that regional bank? What are the instruments? What are its bonds? What are the economic pathways? You know, do you have a stock exchange? These sort of things started to really interest me. And I met in Quinton David Bailey, Professor David Bailey. He was I think he was a doctor then, actually, Dr. David Bailey then. And he just happened to join the party locally into about 95, 96. And obviously David's been a lifelong friend. I was the best man at his wedding. We're close. He's obviously an extremely well-known commentator. You can't get him off the telly at the moment because of VW, obviously. But we worked together as a team. And I've always had. It's been very good because I've always been able to have the background of his academic weight and so on. But we've written together over the years. He got me involved in the Birmingham Post. We wrote our book together, Blogs from the Black Stuff, together, which brought together all of our writings in the Birmingham Post, where we were setting out this kind of approach that says what matters in the West Midlands, what really matters in West Midlands business is small and medium-sized enterprises. What really matters is industry, and that it's something we have to change. The financial setup, the political makeup, whatever, it's something that has to be done because manufacturing industry, our economy was being drained away from the region through the changes in capitalism that were taking place, and especially global capital. I parted company with Brown and Blair on the benefits of global capital. I still do, and I think so. What? For me, socialism is about what impacts on the life of most ordinary people. And I say quite frequently that I've been saying for a long time that most working class people work in small and medium sized enterprises. Okay? And that is if you as a party do not have a policy on how to grow and also protect the lives of people who work in small and medium-sized enterprises, and instead you concentrate on the commanding heights of the economy and pulling those levers, or indeed the nationalised industries, you are actually not social. You're not. It's not true socialism. True socialism has to embrace what happens in our small and medium-sized enterprises, and indeed our micro businesses these days. And that's why I've got no problems with and it's funny that Corbyn should now be talking about, you know, self-employed people and making sure we look after their needs and all that sort of thing. Coming back to where that sort of leaves me now, I think that what I am trying to offer, and what I've tried to offer the party nationally, is a sort of fundamental review of how we do financial politics, the way we do financial engineering, the way we do regional economies in particular. I did spend some time with the Miliband team, the financial team. I did send them stuff. I talked. I mean, as we know, yesterday, you know, or the day before, George Osborne suddenly starts to take up the position of how we merge our 89 local government pension funds and turn them into regional wealth. Now, you've got to say, and obviously, as I said yesterday, I welcome him on board onto Clancynomics. You know, but I was telling, I got interested on the beach 2-3 years ago, perhaps 3 years ago, when I was doing. I'd read this fantastic book called More Money Than God. And it was about the history of hedge funds. That's one of the sort of things I wanted to get into. I then got interested in sovereign wealth funds and where they were and how much they were and this, that, and the other. I just wanted to answer the question, how much money is there in the world? And I think I wrote about this in the Post. So I did some digging, and I said, you know, it's actually quite a difficult one to find out. And I eventually worked out, well, let's base this question on how many assets are invested in the world. You know, it could be that assets in investment can include houses and property and this, that, and the other. But it was then that I suddenly realised something, because I started to look at where money was invested and what the stock markets of the world and global economy were based on, I spotted that, you know, I worked out there's about $72 trillion invested in the world, basically. And it was when I then looked at where this money was coming from that I realised something which I don't think people, certainly on the left, have realised, and that is most of global capital is based around public sector pension funds. And that the biggest sector of investors in global capital are public sector workers and their savings for retirement. And I was blown away. I had absolutely no idea. Yeah, like most of us, we just think that there's this whole this wall of private money, or there's this shoal of private money that just moves around and it's owned by individuals or big bankers. And that's when I really started to look at this. I said, well, just a second, let's take a look. And then I looked at the Towers and Watson 300, which are the 300 biggest pension funds in the world. As I went down it, I suddenly started seeing these, you know, West Yorkshire Local Government Pension Fund, Greater Manchester Pension Fund, Strathclyde Pension Fund. What? And I started to look into it, and I realised that this was serious money. And I got quite nerdy about it, and I started to look at all the annual reports of the 101 pension funds. And I realised that if you'd added them all together, it would be the 5th biggest pension fund in the world. And it was then that I said, well, just a second, this is local government workers' money. This is mainly poor people's money. The average payouts for a woman is £2,800 a year. For a man, it's $4,800 a year. That's all this is. And when I delved into it and realised what was being done with this money, and the amount that global capital was skimming off this money in fees in particular, that I said, well, look, this is money that needs to be rewired back into local economies, into regional economies. There's £11 billion of I then started to look where the money went. So if you go through each annual report, you'll see where it's invested. Most of it goes abroad. Most of it's in equities. So when the crash came, most of these, they lost 40% of their value. A breach of fiduciary duty as far as I'm concerned. So I then got onto this angle of, well, in a situation where we have austerity politics, for what it's worth, actually there is a way of, if you've not got the money because you're not bringing it in through taxation, or you are having to cut spending,
or you choose not to increase taxation.
Exactly. Well, I've said that in my last piece. The real decisions that were made by the Labour Party that I disagreed with, the reason I am prepared to accept that the Labour Party made mistakes last time round was that they infantilised, or successive administrations of both parties infantilised the British public not to accept tax increases, and that in fact there wouldn't have been a deficit. Actually, had we taken a different approach to taxation, and it wasn't to do with, but it certainly had nothing to do, as far as I was concerned, with excessive public spending. Beyond that, public spending which had an expectation of economic growth which was inappropriate. In other words, that the bubble was just expected to keep on expanding, and therefore we would get those tax increases. So you ended up with a worse kind of situation because. You didn't accept the economic cycles that tax increases tax take would come down, because there would be a crash eventually, because the taxation was becoming so much lower. We were in a double bind, because you were ending up with even less taxation coming in a recession. So that, in that sense, you could say that the recession was the responsibility of Labour's economic policies between 2000 and 2010 in particular. But it wasn't because of excessive public spending as such. No. But my view was that, well, actually, there is wealth. This is a wealthy country. There is wealth in our regions, and our wealth is spirited away. And so that's when I started to link everything together to say, well, look, actually, we need our pension funds to be an anchor to wealth in our economy. It needs to be based on 3 kind of principles. They should be investing in the local economy long term, in small and medium-sized enterprises. We should be investing in industry. We should be investing in infrastructure, and most importantly, we should be investing in housing. And that what we should be doing is using our pension funds as an anchor investor in a wider regional wealth fund that local councils themselves are involved in. The problem at the moment is some people are saying, well, if you're using the pension funds, it's pork barrel politics. You've got, a bunch of councillors saying, right, let's get this money out of this. And this is poor people's money that's crucial to their retirement. You can't do that. So my view is actually that there has been a misunderstanding. I think George Osborne's got a misunderstanding, I have to say. That actually what matters is, as I've proposed very recently, that we've got billions of pounds worth of assets just in local government asset registers across the entire West Midlands. 6 billion, or perhaps 5 billion now we've sold the NEC, 5 billion in Birmingham, probably as much in the other authorities. You've got a £10 billion asset base. We're doing nothing with them. Our biggest asset base, and our biggest, to my mind, our biggest and most important asset is actually our council housing. But it's seen by politicians across the West Midlands as a drain, as something that's bad, as something that we're having to work with, and we'd rather sell it off. In fact, obviously in this city we did try and effectively get rid of it as well with stock transfer. But in fact, people haven't grasped, because they don't get the financial engineering realities of what you can do. And this is the whole point I'm making here, that if you do get financial engineering, if you do get financial instruments, if you get the legals, more importantly, as to how this whole thing can work, you can actually make those assets work for you. I suggest that we actually pool our assets across the West Midlands. We have that as part of a triangle, where you then bring the pension fund has got something it can invest in that's got an asset base to it. Because pension funds can't just invest in anything. There's got to be something that has a clear return to it, because they're going to make a responsible investment. You then, having got a cornerstone investor of considerable wealth, i.e. the local government pension fund, involved, you've got an asset base that's got real assets. We're not borrowing against future this, that, and the other, which is tax incremental future financing, TIFs. Borrowing against the possibility we might get some money in the future, or indeed this Devo deal, that's coming in, the idea is because we're going to get this money from the government and devolution, we can borrow against that. Nonsense. Never politics. Complete nonsense. You've got actual assets that you can set things against. And when you do that, the private sector wall of money will come in as well. And that's how you create a regional wealth fund. And that's what invests in housing. That's what invests in most importantly, in jobs, in businesses, in the West Midlands. And invests in local, nascent businesses, in specifically in the new areas of. I mean, my big thing is I think we're missing a trick in the city on 3D printing. I think we could become a 3D printing city, and it would be extremely an extremely vital part of regenerating the city. I think it's going to be huge, both in automotive, in aerospace, in medics, life sciences, but just in basic everyday, making a product for the house, I think it's going to be huge, and I think that's where we can be investing in, getting businesses across the West Midlands. But the key thing is the housing. I see it as becoming a virtuous circle, that actually if you get your housing in the assets of a regional wealth fund, you have to invest in that housing to make it an even better asset. And that means you can bring in the dead hand of the weight of the assets which are currently doing nothing. We own greyhound stadiums, we own commercial offices, we own stuff that just lies there on the asset register. I don't think we should sell it. I think we should use it. We should sweat it. So those are the things so this is where, but you can't come to these conclusions until you do capitalism. Until you, as a socialist, you understand not the evils of capitalism, not how awful it is, but you understand how it bloody works, so you can turn it round and make it a socialist thing. You can make it something which is for the good of ordinary working people across the West Midlands. And global capital has let us down in the West Midlands, absolutely no question.
John Clancy is passionate about teaching. He went on at great length about his involvement with teaching and how he saw education as being one of the most important factors in Labour policy. But I was more interested in the background of how he became a councillor. And for those interested in that particular section, you will have to wait for the full transcript. Let me take you on, John, if I might do, to your then decision to stand.
Right. Well,
because that's an important aspect of where you were going in politically.
I was still a teacher, by the way.
Yes. So tell me why you decided to...
I think, one, you get the politics bug, first off. You do, don't you? And when you see other people getting elected, you think, well, I could do that, to be brutally honest, I could do that. And I thought I had... I went through a period between about 95 and 2000 where I applied for parliamentary seats and got absolutely nowhere.
Where at?
Oh, all over the place. I applied, I think even in the 90... when was it? I think there was a Dudley by-election once. I think I applied for by-elections that came up as they came up. It was a pretty scattergun approach. Also, the view was get myself known around the circuit, as it were, as well. That was the reason for doing it. And I applied for some... I think the big ones that the big one was the... Let me try and think the order of events here. The West Brom West by-election, Betty Boothroyd, I was shortlisted. I went down to London and did all the usual stuff, and I was shortlisted. I mean, it was pretty astonishing.
Very winnable seat.
Well, indeed. But Adrian Bailey was obviously the local candidate and got it. I did try and do a bit of working around it, but I was a relatively young. I was going to say relatively young. I was in my 40s, I suppose. But going down to London, getting through that, surviving the selection procedure just in London, I thought was something. I thought, well, actually, this is something I can do. But I consistently started to get knocked back. Really, the all women shortlist as a matter of interest did limit what I could do. Quite clearly, there was a whole range of parachuting going on down the country, and you were in there to make up the numbers more often than not. But the big ones that I went for were for the 2001 election, Wolverhampton South West for a parliamentary. Rob Maris got that. I had a sort of good run at that. In retrospect, utterly doomed, but I had a good run at it. It gave me experience. And obviously the West Brom West. I think I did some northern stuff because I think Lee, where Andy Burnham eventually ended up. I was longlisted for St Helens South, which Sean Woodward got. So I'm throwing you these, Sean Woodward, who had just defected.
Indeed.
We had so he was then selected for that, and I saw all the union machinations in particular to get that sorted. And I think I got to the stage there. Then I'd sort of realised the way these things worked, and I really was just making up numbers. But I was out there. I was putting myself forward. I was also putting my views forward and so on. But I saw a side of the Labour Party I didn't like. The machine politics that I didn't like. And
the black arts were operating.
Absolutely, no question. And all sorts of people. I remember I've been through lots of... I've probably been through more by-election selection panels than most people, actually. I think I've got very good experience of it. And I've worked out now the way they do it. I'll tell you the way they do it. The reason they get away with it, actually, is because everybody does badly. It's a very tough thing to put yourself forward for a by-election selection, because you have to go through the Labour Party's by-election selection procedure, which involves quite an aggressive whittling down of people, and you have to go through an interview, and the usual thing is you have to go through a hostile press conference after they've whittled down those people. Now the reality is, and I know this, everybody does badly. Nobody wings it. I remember speaking to Sean Woodward afterwards, and he said it's the worst 15 minutes of my life. Now, the reality is that even good, confident politicians, when they go through this, when they realise they've not been shortlisted or they're not out of it, they think, well, it was because it was crap. It was absolutely awful. That's just me. I'm just rubbish, aren't I? I can't really blame the party. But the reality is, all 6 of the people will have done equally badly, because it's such an aggressive... And it's not the sort of thing you actually end up even doing on the... it's a sort of post-Miliband world. I mean, in the old days, it used to be great when they used to have a press conference every morning and the local by-election candidate for a parliamentary election would be put in front of the press and be taken to pieces. And of course, that was stopped, obviously, by Mandelson in particular. And what eventually happened was that by-election candidates used to be not put before the press. They used to have minders and so on and so on. So I've been shortlisted. I've been longlisted for. I was longlisted for Erdington last time, and that was a bit of a to a certain extent. I don't even know why I even put my. I sent an email, but obviously Jack Dromey was. I've been through all these names of these people who eventually get into these positions. Like Jack Dromey, but the reality was that. I think I made a decision in any event that I wanted to be part of representational politics. I wanted to be in there, whether it was as an MP or as a councillor. And when I started to see things weren't going quite right in terms of the parliamentary side of things, I decided I wanted to stand for the council. Problem was that at the time we had, I think we had 3, by the early 2000s, the gains that we've made in Quinton, this wasn't a safe seat, and to be honest, it wasn't available either. As a winnable seat, and obviously made the judgment I wanted a winnable seat then. Now, of course, it's an eminently winnable seat, and I've done it twice here. But at the time, it was there were 3 Tory councillors. So if I wanted to actually have power, as opposed to stand in Quinton, so Hodge Hill became available at a by-election. There were hints that possibly, in any event, that. Terry Davies MP was coming to the end of his political career. He was looking at Europe and being president of the Council of Europe, so there were some attractions to being around just in case there was a by-election there, to be really honest. But I went for it. It was February. It was February 2002, I think. Midwinter. The turnout was 15%. And I won the by-election. in that winter, and there I was in representational politics in the chamber in Birmingham, finding my way. It took me years to find my way. I mean, I see these youngsters coming in now who are up there making speeches left, right, and centre, and I say to them, it took me months to get up, and even my maiden speech was a very safe affair, and this, that, and the other, and so I was fairly low profile.
But you were working full time at the.
I was, and that was.
That's
the
the difference, isn't it? Surely.
Totally correct. Totally correct. And I said this now, that when I came back into Quinton, it was a very stressful time to be a councillor on Birmingham City Council and being the head of a large department in a comprehensive school, and all the stresses and strains that involves anyway. So in retrospect, it was too much. It was no question it was too much.
Is that just the way it is now, that you can't actually be an effective politician, say in a massive council like Birmingham, and actually have, to use the word that we're doing, a hinterland and a life? It's almost.
I think I do have a hinterland, I have to say now. That's only because I've not got a full-time job, actually.
Yeah.
But I think that's true. I think. I mean, I used to remember doing a full day's teaching and having to drive home from Walsall and then having to drive over to Hodge Hill. And I used to remember drinking these milkshakes at the time as being the only way of actually getting any kind of food inside of you, between the end of the school working day and going to some ward committee or whatever. It was too much, I have to say.
But Hodge Hill was is an area of deprivation.
Absolutely.
So in a way, you would have had the experience, having seen the young people that you'd come.
Leamore, to a certain extent, obviously Quinton itself is very similar to Hodge Hill. The Valley, in particular, down there, four-dwelling school, very similar to the kind of school I taught at. At the time, of course, I was blocked from. I couldn't become a counsellor if I worked as a teacher in a Birmingham school in those days. So I did actually steer clear of. That's why I was in Walsall, basically. But you're right. The Bromford estate, in particular, is as deprived as anywhere in the city, and
many of my clients came from the Bromford.
Absolutely. So I got to know the Bromford, and it's got a very deep place in my heart. But it was interesting. The similarities to Quinton were very interesting. The possible difference would be the incoming Asian. Especially the middle class areas in Hodge Hill was a distinct different compared to over here. Also, I took out a Tory. I was very pleased with that. I've always sold the line that I've actually never lost an election that I've actually run. I do think I run efficient election winning fighting machines. Basically, I think I get very non-ideological. It's about the process of winning, and it's always been important to me.
Nothing better.
The mechanics
than winning.
Absolutely correct. I love it. Absolutely. The mechanics of doing that, representational politics, internal politics, and all that sort of things, doesn't have the same buzz actually as getting elected in a tight seat. And I've done that. I've been elected 4 times. First time I beat a Tory in a by-election. That was great in Hodge Hill. The second time, by the time we had the all-ups in 2000, whatever it was, 4 or 5, because I'd won in a by-election, so I had to stand when the other person stepped down, would step down. The Liberals had started. It was post Gulf. It was post Iraq. So we'd suddenly started to lose. And we'd got the Liberals taking seats across the constituency, and
respect in the inner cities.
So the Liberals came second when I fought the second time. So I had the experience of fighting off the Tories and fighting off the Liberals in my first 2 big electoral tests. I came because it was an all-up. I came third of the 3 of us by about 100 odd votes, which meant I was then up again in 2 years' time after that. That's why I was there for. I won 2 elections, but one was a by-election and then an all-up, and then I made the decision to retire, to step down, and that had a lot to do with the stresses of doing the two jobs in 2006. Now, when I consequently, when I made the decision to come back, the reality was, I suppose, Quinton was becoming much more. The demographic changes that there have been in Quinton have been quite astonishing over the last 15 years. It's become a much more public sector, worker-based. The biggest employer in the constituency is now the university and the hospital. And areas of this ward in particular have become places where lecturers and hospital workers work. And actually the demographics have really quite seriously changed. And Quinton became a much more winnable seat in any event. But it was still, I still took it off a Tory. So Matthew Gregson won it in the general election in 2010, which I think would probably worth saying was a bit of a surprise. But I said to Caroline Badley, who was the coordinator for the ward, well, you know, I'm interested in coming back, but this time I would probably do it full time and not have the full whack of a teaching career with it. And the great thing would be, I walk outside my front door and it's my ward, it's my patch. And we decided to go with it to a certain extent on our punt, but obviously there were 2 Tory councillors and 1 Labour councillor, so it was this time it was something that we really had to organise well to do, and we did it. And I won in 2011. I became a Quinton councillor, and it was just fantastic. It was just. There's nothing like being a councillor in your own patch. I mean, apart from the fact that I had to get into a car and drive for 40 minutes to get over to Hodge Hill. I mean, literally, when I used to go to ward committee meetings, I literally go down to the Quimborne, which I walk to from here. And obviously, I know my patch, and I know it as well as any other politician, I would suggest, or better than any other politician. I know this patch inside out. I've been here for 25 years. So I think that's. So when I was out for 4 years, it was a very odd experience, and I did delivered leaflets and went to the occasional branch meeting and things like that, but I did pretty much disengage for about 4 years.
So why do you want to be the Labour leader?
Of Birmingham. I'm not suggesting I'm going to be Labour leader elsewhere, but I think at the moment that I think that I have got the political will to do something that turns Birmingham around into something which both the party, the region, the country can be proud of, when currently it's not. And I think that it's the nature of politics, you know. We need fresh ideas, we need renewal, and there is no renewal at the moment. We are currently going over old ground, we're repeating mistakes, and we need a radical approach to not just Birmingham but also the West Midlands, and we need to work together across the West Midlands. I think that I have got the life experiences, the practical politics ideas that mean that Birmingham can be turned into again, because it's not, to a great world city, based upon its economy, based upon an economy which is real, that it's not imagined, that it's not based on financial services. People have, you know me, I know financial services inside out. I know that they're important. I know it's important to the city, and I will be backing financial services in the city, but we cannot base our entire regional economy upon financial services. We simply can't. And I think we need a renaissance in the city and in the region. And I think it takes very clear political will and action, and a political programme and a vision, which I actually think I've got, that means that Labour, and this is a Labour city, you know, look at the result. This is a Labour region. One of the concerns I have, of course, about the shenanigans that's going on in relation to the combined authority and the devolution deal is that bit by bit Osborne is allowing the Tory shires into it and their voters, with an attempt to basically turn the West Midlands into a Tory controlled area, and that's another reason why I want to be the leader of Birmingham City Council, because I think we've got to arrest that now, and there's a real danger of us sleepwalking into that. But I think, however, having said that, I also think I'm very good at working cross-party. I think that other parties can probably join in with the platform that I've got because it's practical, because it's about the economy. It's not wholly ideologically driven either. But I do think it's socialism. But I think there are aspects to it that I think the Liberals and the Tories can work with as well. I do think we have to work. There's no question that one of our biggest failures is our failings to work with a whole range of different people and partners and people who want to get involved in the city. We've excluded them. They're felt excluded. It has to be said that Kerslake was pretty spot on in the idea that if it's worth doing in this area, the council should be doing it. It's nonsense. I feel we've got a council that needs a vision that puts the citizens at the heart of what it does, and not the council at the heart of what it does. I'm sorry to say, I think we have a vision. I think we have directorates, and the clue's in the title. We're being directed, and the council services is being done to the citizens of Birmingham. They're not. They don't feel they are their services. It's something as mundane as the recycling and the wheelie bin rollout has been something which has been so badly mishandled that something which actually probably most people are with and are prepared to be with it's become something that again has been done to people. The nature of we were at Ward Committee last week, and people who were just saying, look, I don't want a wheelie bin because I'm disabled or whatever, or you should see the steps that I've got to go up to get my... These nasty, arrogant letters that they get from the council saying, I'm terribly sorry, but I'm afraid these decisions have been made and you're just going to have to put up with it, essentially. And people were saying it's just the tone. And for me, that encapsulates what this city council has become. It's become something that does things to people. And we've got to have a situation, my vision is every citizen matters, every place matters. And we do not have that vision in the city. Certain places matter more than others. Certain people matter more than others. And I don't think our employees, I don't think our councillors, and most importantly, I don't think our citizens have got a sense that our council works for them. And I think it's encapsulated by the overconcentration of development on the city centre, in particular. That means, here we are right on the edge of the city in Quinton. I think people in Quinton don't actually think Quinton matters compared to other parts of the city.
Well, that's been a driving force in Sir Albert's, to use the vision, over 20, 25 years. That
it's now the wrong vision.
Do you think it was the right vision when it was
it's very difficult to say.
What did Birmingham look like 20, 25 years ago?
Well,
lots of people thought it looked pretty run down.
But what did Quinton look like 25 years ago?
Well, that's an interesting point.
What did Oscott look like 25 years ago? What did Hodge Hill look like 25 years ago? It doesn't matter how much... I'll tell you, some people in politics in Birmingham don't get this. The people of Quinton don't actually, as a whole, go into town very much, either to work or to play or to shop. It's like that thing I was saying about the kids in Leamore. They go to Warsaw occasionally. We would have to physically take them to Birmingham. People don't imagine the city of Birmingham as being its city centre. Some people don't get on trains. We're spending all the money that we spent on the station and HS2. What really matters to people is their bus services around here. That's how they engage with transport around here. Most people in Quinton. So what you do in the city centre, and I'm not sure, for example, the Martineau Centre, fantastic facility. At one point, it was the biggest employer in terms of in Quinton, above Tesco. It's now no longer there. It had peripatetic teachers, it had educational social workers, it had also. These people are now going into town on buses and the transport system through a situation where we're building so much on the city centre and there's so much in financial services that we're moving to transport gridlock. In fact, it was a great idea to have a satellite in Quinton, on the edge of the city, that people were working in. Instead, it's now houses. It's been knocked down and it's now houses. Totally disgraceful. A playing field built over. I won't go into the details of this, but this was something that has caused a tremendous amount of problem inside the Labour Party here, because we were sold down the river on that one. But that happens.
But that brings me to one question about this, is that
it's a 40-ward thing. That's why every place matters. It's got to be a 40-ward thing.
Indeed.
Economic development in particular has to be a 40-ward thing. Every place matters. Every business matters. And that's my third thing. I mean, if you come up with a snappy vision, every citizen matters, every place matters. I would add to that, actually, every business matters. I think there was a sense that only certain businesses matter in Birmingham as well. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was really trying to say that maybe the whole idea of the loss of power from local areas, that means that, in a way, those people who might have gone into representational politics of a particular calibre, because they thought they could influence the local area, they had a commitment to the local area, have decided not to do that and have been involved in other things, or think that power lays in other places if they're interested.
That's a very good point you make. I agree with you.
I'm interested in I've lived in Quinton for 25 years. I'm committed to it.
Well, just about accepted me after 25 years.
Well, the reality is that we have been told, and seems to be the way it is, that we had ward politics, and then that fed into districts, and now has it fed into the centre, and is all the power in the centre where all the patronage is? And is that the real problem from your point of view? And I don't want to put words into your mouth.
It is, and that's where, when we have big meetings here, when we have ward committee meetings or big meetings about the centre, it's very difficult to say, if there is an executive, if there's a leader in a cabinet essentially making decisions and making policy, that it's perhaps a limp response, but all I can ultimately say to people here is, well, I'm a backbencher. I can have influence through my Labour group, possibly, but in fact the decision has been made by the cabinet member, and I may have some influence on that, but I am not making the decision. We have full council, 10 times a year if we're lucky. We don't make decisions in full council apart from the budget.
Let me put this to you then. Let's say on Friday, Sir Albert tenders his resignation, and there is another election under the Labour Party rules.
Yeah.
I take it that you would stand.
Yes.
Let us assume that you become the leader of the Labour group. Are you saying that you wouldn't have a cabinet? You wouldn't have a system that operates that way? Tentacles of patronage?
I am saying that, yes. I would want to.
That is very radical politics in
I would
city.
Want to. Yes, I would want. First of all, I'm a believer in real devolution. I'm a believer in a network of cooperatives and mutuals to deliver services across the city at its most local level, where people's services are in the hands of the people who deliver those services, the officers, in fact, I have a bit of a problem with the word officer actually. And the people receiving those services.
So Quinton Lane owns Quinton Lane?
No, I think
in the sense that those people have a responsibility as community
if they want
to do.
If they want to.
If they want to take it up.
Yeah, I think the point is that people tend to, for some people, it depends on, there are some services that are best delivered across the city, and that are best delivered in a mutual or a cooperative in which the people who are most involved in that service, so it could be home to school transport or whatever, it could be to do with disabilities. Some of those things are better delivered across the city. It could very well be that economies of scale mean that refuse is best dealt with across the city. I'm not sure about that, but I don't think districts ever worked. I would much rather, I did say at the last district committee, I hope we don't have any more of these. I look forward to the situation where the people of Quinton have their own committee where decisions are made at the most local level, and I think the district's idea was a mistake. I would much more devolve to the wards themselves. I have already been on record to say that I prefer a committee system. if in the current light of Kerslake and improvement panels, it would be too radical a step to make in the midst of all of this. I would look towards a situation where we would try to make the cabinet and leader system much wider and involve much more people.
With elections?
I have suggested that we should move towards elections. It could very well be that we have, but I would rather have elections of chairs of committees.
Where you say the real power would be?
Yeah.
Because
I think
that goes back to the old politics, doesn't it?
Does.
Surely if you are
does.
going to have elections...
However, that has to be for strategic things across the city. I'm still of a mind that they should scrutinise and have an overview facility of a much wider vision of the city, where every citizen matters, every place matters, through delivery of services which are much more closer to their to their communities. But what I would say is I don't think the leader and cabinet system has worked, full stop. So we have to come up with another system. I think that the leader and cabinet system was only ever intended to be a stopgap between the old system and a mayor, an elected mayor. It was expected that the city would have an elected mayor. It didn't. I therefore don't think actually the cabinet and leader system is appropriate. I think it was always intended to be a stopgap. I would want to have as many councillors, as I've said this, I want to have as many councillors as possible involved in the running of the city. I think also having different parties involved in the running of those things.
Somebody said to me in an interview I've done for Labour Lives that actually involving 70 plus councillors, some of whom are of great high quality, some of whom are perhaps not of the greatest quality, or have been involved in some of the shenanigans in the past, is a mighty feat that almost one person couldn't be involved in.
It's exclusive. The situation is so exclusive, and talent is so excluded under the current system that we have to move to another system, whatever that may be, and it may be a hybrid system that we need to move towards. But I am determined that the leader and cabinet system will effectively be broken down if I become leader of the council from its current exclusive, shut down system.
Without putting it in a sort of a blunt way, well, in fact, by putting it in a blunt way, you've secured about 30 odd votes or so.
About 40% of the Labour.
40% of the Labour group. It's got close. It's been close in the past for Sir Albert. Described as the great survivor over many years. If you have the system that you are, the offer that you're putting out to the Labour group, what's in it for them to vote for John Clancy, that at the moment a job and patronage and a possible will move you up the order in the next reshuffle or whatever, can you offer if you're going for this wholly democratic system where chairs are to be voted by the Labour group? Isn't it? I'm just thinking in terms of a man who likes to win elections.
It is a hybrid
if you're
system.
looking at that system, you've got to say to yourself, how am I going to win that election?
You would use the Labour Party rules for a start to ensure. See, at the moment, the only reason I've challenged Albert, for the last 5 years is because the rules allow it, and they can be changed, and the Labour groups can change that. You can have a settled period of leadership without challenges. You could have votes of no confidence, admittedly, but in a situation where if you like, it's part of the deal. If I give power away, there has to be something back.
Is that not such a sophisticated argument that it might not get through?
It's the new politics. Once you're in, and you try to stay in, and you do whatever, you use whatever the democratic principles are that enable you to do that. There's nothing wrong with saying that you use the rules of the party or whatever to ensure that you remain in office. But I suppose leadership is about confidence in that leader. I accept that in the past, that regretfully, I think it has been done on the basis of patronage and sinecure. Perhaps in the new politics we have to move away from that, and you have to earn your right to be a leader and sustain that leadership. And again, the other question is, it comes down to your record and what you're doing. I'm not proposing that all executive decisions are made by committees. I am saying that we need to move to a hybrid system whereby the decisions that are currently made by cabinet members are more widely shared, discussed and voted upon, for example. And there may be certain executive powers that are retained. But I accept it's a political risk.
I'm interested.
It may be put it this way, that for an interim period that the chairs of committees will be appointed in that hybrid system until we move to a situation where the political settlement that is agreed inside the Labour group is more accepting of a movement towards an elected, more democratic system.
And you believe change is coming?
Yes.
A time frame?
I've not looked at my emails today.
We're saying this on the day after a cabinet member resigned, James Mackay, a colleague of yours within Edgbaston, no doubt a man that you've worked closely with and know very well.
Yes.
Is James Mackay making a pitch for the leadership?
We'll see. He said he's not ruling it in or ruling it out. You know what that normally means.
Indeed. Is it the nature of politicians to be ambitious? You've got to be ambitious. You've got to want to do that thing. Not just because I stand because I want to serve, but because I want to do things.
This is the fundamental misunderstanding, isn't it? It's easily said, members of the public, and they're all in it for themselves and so on. But I think my record shows. I mean, I've chosen. Some people, when they try and sell me to other people, have said, "Look, John could have been a lawyer, he could have been a solicitor, he could have been a high pound, he could have made hundreds of thousands of pounds. He's chosen to be a teacher. He's chosen to be a local politician. These are I don't do stuff for the money. I don't do things. I suppose you might be saying you want to do it for the ambition and the glory and all that sort of thing. But in fact, I think if anything that's come out of the last couple of hours, I have a record of wanting to change things and changing things and having an impact on the world, and that's clearly why I do it. And taking control of the largest local authority of Europe is the kind of power that means you can effect real change. I still think if I was a leader for 10 years, I might not have effected as much change as I did when I was a teacher for 14 years.
Indeed.
However, at this point in my life, what I believe that I can do with political power, with admittedly that comes from the leader and cabinet system as currently set up, means that the imprint that I think I can leave in the city and across the region, if we all work together as well, is something which drives me, absolutely drives me, and it would be a wonderful opportunity to do it. If it didn't happen, it wouldn't be the end of the world for me. These things. I'm quite happy if people of Birmingham. I mean, more people voted for. Blow my own trumpet, but I got the highest vote of any councillor in the history of democracy in Quinton. No one, 4,824 votes. That's never been received by a Tory, Labour, or whatever. Admittedly, in a general election year, I accept that. However, I'd also previously got the highest vote of a Labour councillor in a local election, not in a general election year. So, I love that, and that can still keep me going. And I want to represent the people of Quinton until they want to get rid of me. And I've got enough about me in terms of if this thing happens and it is offered to me, it will be something that I will really run for, but it won't be the end of the world for me.
Well, you've given me a considerable amount of time, and I'm really grateful. I take from this that your socialism and your belief is deep-rooted, embedded, and is firmly on the ground.
Absolutely.
But it is also about the notion of helping the individual and not necessarily doing this because this is a job. Absolutely. This is for you a cause.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And I may find another cause if this, but I don't think so. I love being a Quinton councillor. I have to say it's been great. I'm far more than being a Hodge councillor, mainly because I was young, I didn't know how to do things, and it was a long way away. But this is in my blood. Quinton's in my blood, and I can quite happily carry on with this. I may find another cause if it's not to lead the city council down the line. I may find another cause while still being a Quinton councillor. I think that's deep in my blood now. If I can keep getting elected, that's deep within me. I think.
Well, John Clancy,
Right,
thank you very much indeed. Thank you.